Welcome to This Explainer. I'm your host, but today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm stepping directly into the shoes of our subject to really bring this source material to life. So for the rest of our time together, I will be speaking to you from the perspective of the ruined seeker. Consider this a welcome to the grim, rather brutal autopsy of my own soul. We're going to map out the exact anatomy of a psychological failure, charting my descent from a seeker of greatness right into a captive of my own stagnation. So let's look at the very first piece of evidence on this journey. Rattle, rattle. Yeah, that is the sound of Dicrochenweide, the bone willow. Picture this twisted tree, its white bark gleaming like sun-bleached ribs against an ink-black sky. Its branches just scrape together, acting as this unseen quill to write my epitaph. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the framework for our explainer today, an inverted Fichtean dialectic. Now, we usually think of progress as a thesis meeting an antithesis, which gives us a higher synthesis, right? But as the bone willow mocks my cowardice, it sets the stage for a much darker fable. This is a dialectic where the synthesis completely fails, dropping us into a permanent downward spiral. Part 1. Thesis, the oasis of the ego. Okay, so every dialectic begins with a thesis, our starting point. And I started this journey with what I genuinely believed was a heroic flame. I really thought I was on the path to self-overcoming. I held up my performative altruism, my so-called good deeds, and naively believed this was the absolute pinnacle of ascension. I basically thought I had already won. But I have a confession to make to you all. I mistook comfortable stagnation for actual victory. I approached the roots of power thinking I'd earned my place, but instead of bringing the grease on the gears of power, the gritty substance of a truly tested soul, I brought only shiny dirt. I wanted the massive reward of the true summit while just lazily lingering in the shimmering oasis of my own ego. Part 2. Antithesis. Confronting the starry abyss. So a thesis just cannot exist unchallenged. For any real growth to happen, the universe sends the shadow, merging with the terrifying expanse of the starry abyss. This was the internal devil I was meant to face, the dark mirror of my own unacknowledged flaws. But here's the thing. This internal devil, it doesn't work for free. It demands the currency of sin. This is the psychological toll of actually naming your own malice. It's admitting your greed, your envy, your dark desires, all to achieve internal sacrifice. The shadow demanded this exact currency to create the friction required to ignite the true fire of the overman. But I cowardly refused to pay it. I was literally more afraid of the maggot's crawl of my own psyche than I desired true ascension. Now, if I had just paid that toll, the shadow would have become a transformed companion, a totally necessary counterweight to help me climb. But because I fled, because I utterly refused to name my malice, those unacknowledged devils mutated. They became my executioners in the abyss. Instead of staring into the void and transforming it, I panicked. I drank the wine of total despair offered by the soothsayer, effectively poisoning my own journey right then and there. Part 3. The failed synthesis, the refusal to evolve. In a healthy Fichtean dialectic, I would have integrated the shadow and emerged stronger, but instead the dialectic inverted, leading to a massive structural collapse, which happened in 3 distinct steps. Step 1, deny the currency of sin. Basically, I refused to own my darkness. Step 2, retreat behind decorative shrouds. I wrapped myself in this performative grief and noble silence to look like a victim, purely to hide my cowardice. And finally, step 3, suffer structural collapse of character. The weight of all that secret guilt and unconfessed malice was just too heavy. Think of a blacksmith's forge collapsing under hidden weight. That was my foundation cracking. My soul hardened into a literal monument to psychological death. Part 4. The Beast of Resentment. Once that foundation shattered, I mutated. My stagnant soul didn't just break, it splintered into 3 fractured archetypes of the fallen. I became the beast of resentment, literally kneeling in the mud of my own perceived victimhood, hoarding my injuries like a dragon guarding a pile of entirely worthless stones. I also became the celebrated victim, desperately clinging to a cruel joke of a hope just because I feared the bitter sting of abandonment way more than the actual rot spreading in my own soul. And finally, I became the spirit of negation. Let's actually focus on this middle archetype for a second because it completely consumed me. The spirit of negation. The source material describes this as a cosmic vampire. Because I lacked the courage to actually achieve greatness, I just began to mock it in others. My previous altruism? Turns out it was nothing but a polite mask worn over an incredibly deep well of greed. I became a creature that negates life purely because it is too afraid to live it. Part 5. the Inquisitor and the Willow.
So in this pathetic state, I get a visitor. Salvio Pallido, the Pale Inquisitor. His hands were literally stained by the quicksilver of my failed introspection, and he possessed these cold, atavistic fires right where his heart should be. Naturally, I tried to defend myself from his inspection, building this fragile glass fortress of logic to justify my stagnation. But under his piercing gaze, my panic heated my thoughts and my mental walls simply melted away. What was exposed right beneath was the heresy of my unexamined thoughts, the sheer atavistic human brutality and cowardice I was hiding. He looked at my mind and saw it for what it truly was, a breeding ground for maggots.
The Bone Willow, observing all of this, delivered its final diatribe. You wept for the flesh while your skull became an alchemical laboratory of deceit. Man, what a chilling and perfectly accurate diagnosis. I was distilling all these complex justifications for my cowardice and casually calling it survival. The Willow realized that my entire life was nothing but a thin coat of paint over a hollow void. A void that was finally claiming its due.
Part 6. Final Inversion. Void of the Glowing Eyes. When you completely refuse to self-renew, when you fail the trial of the starry abyss, your spirit undergoes a terrifying physical and psychological manifestation. My eyes began to emit this sick, yellow glow, the glow of absolute unadulterated hatred. This void is an existence where your soul is entirely consumed by the very shadows you refuse to name. I became totally consumed by repressed malice and unexpressed envy, frozen forever in absolute psychological stagnation. Because I wouldn't name my darkness, it literally became my entire existence.
Looking back, the ultimate choice I faced, and the choice I so spectacularly failed to make, was stark. On one hand, you have the velvet cage of safe sorrow. On the other, the terrifying effort of joy. Joy and self-overcoming require terrifying effort. They really do. They require facing the abyss. But I chose the velvet cage. I chose safe delusions, and as a result, I was permanently anchored to the earth, doomed to drink only the raw bitterness of truth from the obsidian well of my own making. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question. The shadow is coming for you, just as it came for me. That is simply the nature of growth. So, when the shadow glides into your clearing, will you have the courage to name your malice and pay the currency of sin? Or will you refuse the terrifying effort of joy and join me here, forever locked inside the velvet cage, just waiting for the Bone Willow to write your epitaph? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and please, face your shadows.